My name is Anna Mitchell. I'm 31 years old and a single mom to Ellie, my little girl who just turned 5. That morning, I stood outside courtroom 3, my hands ice cold and clenched together, my chest tightening like someone was squeezing the air out of me. With every tick of the second hand, I felt myself getting closer to the moment I might lose the most precious thing in my life. Inside that room, sitting across from me, was Caroline Foster, my former mother-in-law. A woman who once treated me like a stranger was now calmly petitioning the court for custody of Ellie. I tried to take a deep breath, telling myself to stay calm. But when the judge looked straight at me and spoke, "We're ready to begin the hearing," my knees nearly gave out. I wasn't sure I could even breathe. 2 years ago, my world was simple. Lucas, my husband, and I lived with Ellie in a small white house on the outskirts of Wilmington, Delaware. The front yard was filled with daisies Lucas planted just for me to enjoy in the evening. Lucas had always been my rock, a gentle, quiet man who looked at me like I was his whole world. But everything fell apart one rainy night when his car lost control on the highway. The hospital call that night shattered the life I once knew. I didn't just lose my partner, I lost a part of myself. But I still had Ellie. She was the reason I didn't sink. Every morning, I forced myself to get up, pack her lunch, hold her little hand and take her to preschool. I learned to hide my tears behind smiles, to make sure my daughter always felt safe. We built our own rhythm, filled with afternoons reading on the sofa, snowy mornings in the backyard and laughter in a kitchen that always smelled like warm cookies. But then Caroline showed up. She had never truly accepted me. Even when Lucas was alive, she thought I wasn't good enough, not worthy of her family. To her, I was just a nobody. A secretary with no background, no name. After Lucas died, Caroline found an excuse to wedge herself deeper into our lives. At first I thought she was grieving. I opened my heart, let her visit Ellie, invited her to birthdays and school events. But little by little, she began to criticize the way I dressed Ellie, the public school I chose, the fact that I hadn't found a decent man to replace Luke. Each comment was like a tiny blade, cutting quietly but deeply. I stayed silent because I wanted Ellie to have her grandmother, but my silence only encouraged Caroline to push further. The breaking point came one afternoon last month when Ellie sat in the back seat after visiting Caroline, looked at me shyly and whispered, "Mommy, if I lived with Grandma, you wouldn't be sad, right?" My heart clenched. A week later, a court summons showed up at my door. Caroline had officially filed for custody of Ellie. In her petition, she described me as emotionally unstable, financially insecure, and lacking an appropriate environment for a... I sank to the floor, the letter shaking in my hands, while Ellie sat at the table nearby doodling with crayons, completely unaware her little world was under threat. I wiped my tears and clenched my fists. I knew I had to fight, for Ellie, for the pure love I had for her, and for myself. A mother who wasn't perfect, but who never lacked love. Now, stepping into that cold courtroom, I could only pray that the truth would be strong enough to keep my daughter with me. Back then, our life was simple but full of laughter. Lucas and I didn't have much, just quiet dinners under warm light. Weekend nights snuggled under blankets, watching Ellie's favorite cartoons over and over. That little house near the river, with its creaky wooden steps and the white daisy garden, was the safest place I'd ever known. Lucas was a civil engineer. I worked part-time for an interior design firm. We didn't have much money, but we were never short on what mattered: love, patience, and promises of tomorrow. Lucas had a way of making everything feel lighter. When I stressed about rent or bills piling up, he'd squeeze my hand and say, "We have Ellie. We have each other. That's enough." And somehow I believed it. Ellie was only 3 then. Our little light. She loved dressing up as a princess, made her dad wear a plastic pink crown every night, and insisted I be her serious audience for living room performances. Lucas never turned down a single game, even when their adventures left the house looking like a tiny tornado had hit. Then, one foggy fall morning, our life changed forever. I still remember how cold it was that day. Lucas kissed my forehead and Ellie's before heading out, holding a half-finished coffee. "I'll just check in at the site real quick. Let's bake apple pie when I get back," he smiled. But he never came home. A truck lost control on the highway just a few miles from our house. They said he died instantly. Didn't feel a thing. But I felt everything. Every second, every shattering heartbeat. The call came while I was slicing apples for our lunch. The knife slipped from my hand, apple slices scattered across the cold tile. I don't remember my screams, only that Ellie, perched on her high chair, stared at me with wide, confused eyes, clutching her stuffed bunny. The days after were a fog. I forced myself to move. Wake up, feed Ellie, even if it was just cold cereal, take her to school, attend parent meetings, pretend everything was fine. When she slept, I curled up on the kitchen floor with Lucas's old coat, breathing in the scent he left behind. Caroline started coming more often then. She brought ready-made dinners, offered to pick up Ellie, and always wore that look of pity I couldn't bear. I knew she was grieving too, but her pain didn't give her the right to take over our lives. Still, I was patient. I told myself Ellie needed her grandmother, needed a piece of Lucas. There were nights Ellie would crawl into bed with me, dragging blankets and whispering, "Don't cry, Mommy, I'm here." I'd hold her close, feel her tiny breaths on my chest, and silently promise no one would ever take that fragile joy away. We found a new rhythm. Baking cookies in the afternoons, reading under the covers at night, Sunday morning bike rides through the park. What I didn't expect was that just when I thought things were finally getting better, Caroline was quietly preparing for war. She began gathering the tiniest evidence: late utility bills, missed school meetings due to work, even photos of Ellie wearing an old coat to school. She waited for me to be vulnerable, and then struck. Ellie's petition arrived on Ellie's birthday. I held it in my hands, frozen in the middle of the living room filled with balloons and cake, watching my little girl giggle over her presents, completely unaware of what was coming. And I knew. This world I'd fought to rebuild for Ellie was about to be threatened all over again. It didn't have many choices left. I had to fight, not just to protect my right to be a mother, but to preserve the warm, loving home that Lucas and I worked so hard to build for our daughter, even if I was the only one left in it now. From the moment I first met Lucas, Caroline made no effort to hide her coldness. She came from an old, prestigious family in Charleston, where polished manners often masked deeply ingrained prejudice. To Caroline, I, a girl from a small town, a public university graduate with no influential relatives, was nothing more than a smudge on the perfect portrait she painted of her family. Lucas always told me not to let it get to me. He believed that with time, Caroline would come around, especially once Ellie was born and brought a new kind of joy into her life, but that never truly happened. After Lucas passed, Caroline started showing up almost every week. At first I thought she was just a grieving mother clinging to her granddaughter for comfort. I tried to open my heart. I let her join us for Christmas, attend fall festivals at Ellie's preschool, even invited her to stay for dinner on special occasions. But over time her presence shifted from that of a doting grandmother to something else entirely. She started issuing suggestions, disguised as gentle commands. Anna, the little one, should be taking ballet, not just doodling all day. Ellie really needs to eat only organic food. I know better places than the ones you're buying from. She deserves a real school, not that overcrowded public one. At first I bit my tongue. I thought if I stayed patient, Caroline would eventually see that Ellie was happy and thriving in her own way. But things quickly spiraled. One Saturday afternoon, I went to pick up Ellie after Caroline had taken her to the park. I froze when I saw her wearing a different uniform dress, holding a flyer for an elite private school with tuition so high I couldn't even dream of affording it. "Caroline, what is this?" I asked, unable to hide the panic in my voice. She took a sip of tea, calm as ever. "I'm simply doing what's best for Ellie. You're still young, Anna. You don't have the experience to know she deserves better." I gripped my purse strap tightly to keep calm. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'm Ellie's mother. I know what's best for her." Caroline's smile faltered just a second before she tilted her head, her voice laced with pity. "Love isn't enough, Anna." That sentence cut deeper than anything else she'd ever said. From that day on, I began setting boundaries. I limited Ellie's time alone with her grandmother. I insisted all visits be supervised by me or someone I trusted. I no longer allowed Caroline to make any decisions concerning my daughter. Caroline didn't respond right away. She stepped back, like a cat crouching before a pounce, watching, waiting. But I knew the quiet was only the start of something worse. Tensions escalated quickly. Caroline began openly criticizing my parenting, even in front of Ellie. Once, as I was tying Ellie's hair before a school performance, Caroline stood behind me and sighed mockingly. Lucas was always well-groomed before leaving the house, such a shame. Ellie glanced at me through the mirror, her face confused. I smiled to reassure her, but inside I felt like my chest was being crushed. I knew I couldn't let my daughter grow up in a haze of judgment and invisible pressure. The more I drew the line, the colder and more aggressive Caroline became. She quietly contacted Ellie's teachers, claiming to be her guardian, and once even picked Ellie up from an after-school class without notifying me. That was the last straw. I wrote Caroline a formal letter clearly outlining the limits. What she could and couldn't do regarding Ellie. I included a firm but respectful warning: if she crossed the line again, I would pursue legal action. I had hoped, faintly, that she would understand. But Caroline didn't back down. She simply went silent, stepped back once more, and then, some time later, a custody petition showed up at my doorstep, like a cold blade cutting through what little trust I'd tried to preserve. From that moment on, I knew Caroline wasn't just a grieving grandmother anymore. She was an opponent. One I had no choice but to face, to protect my child. I remember the day that petition arrived, a gloomy Monday morning, light rain brushing against the kitchen window. The mail carrier knocked, handing me a thick envelope with a creased corner, like even it didn't want to deliver the news. I stood frozen at the doorway, staring at the bold letters: petition for custody transfer, plaintiff Caroline Foster. My hands trembled as I opened it. Page after page painted me as financially unstable, emotionally fragile, and unable to provide a proper developmental environment for Ellie. She twisted facts, saying my part-time job meant no steady income, claiming I was still too grief-stricken to raise a child. I let the papers fall onto the table, gasping for air like someone had sucked all the oxygen from the room. Ellie was on the floor, happily stacking bright Lego blocks, unaware of the storm about to hit us. I called Emily, my sister who'd been my rock since Lucas died. An hour later she was at my door, holding me without asking a single question. "Caroline's going all in," she said after reading the petition. "But you're not alone, Anna. We're going to fight." The biggest problem was, I didn't have the money for a private attorney. A custody battle like this could cost tens of thousands of dollars. Money a part-time single mom like me could never afford. So I turned to the city's legal aid office. They assigned me a young lawyer named Daniel Brooks, who seemed kind but clearly overwhelmed by his caseload. "We'll do everything we can," he said gently, though lacking the firm confidence I desperately needed. "What matters most is evidence. You need to show the court that Ellie is thriving under your care." And so the sleepless nights began. After Ellie went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by her preschool reports, pediatrician notes, photos of her in extracurriculars, thank you notes from teachers. I sorted, labeled, printed, each document like a stitch in the torn fabric of my life. Meanwhile, Caroline didn't slow down. She hired Michael Rowan, one of the most seasoned, expensive family attorneys in Delaware. He was known for flipping minor details into devastating blows. On the first day in court, I wore my plainest business dress, tied my hair neatly, and held Ellie's hand as we walked in. Caroline was already there, polished in her Chanel suit and pearl earrings, smiling thinly like this was just a formality. Michael Rowan launched in quickly, painting a completely false picture of me, an emotionally unstable single mother, financially incapable, ruled by emotion to the point of being a danger to her child. For a child, he emphasized, stability is paramount, and in this case, Mrs. Foster can provide the stability Miss Mitchell cannot. I clenched my hands under the table, nails digging into my palms, but I remembered Daniel's words: stay calm, stay respectful, stay firm. When it was my turn, I stood, voice shaking but resolute, and shared every effort I'd made to give Ellie a joyful, secure life. I presented her teacher's evaluations, doctor's notes confirming her healthy development, photos of her laughing, learning, growing. Each word I spoke, every piece of proof I offered felt like sewing my hope back together, one thread at a time. But deep down I knew Caroline didn't want Ellie just out of love. She wanted control. She wanted to correct the mistake she believed Lucas made, marrying someone like me. I thought the worst was over after that first hearing, but I was wrong. Caroline had no intention of stopping. She had prepared far more than I'd expected, and this time she struck lower than I ever imagined. One Wednesday morning, as I scrambled to get Ellie ready for school, the doorbell rang. Standing outside were two strangers, in uniform shirts, official badges in hand, from the State Child Protection Agency. We received an anonymous report suggesting that Ellie may be living in an unsafe environment, the woman said, voice flat and procedural. I froze. Ellie clutched my dress, her tiny face lifted in confusion. We'll need to inspect the home and speak with the child alone, the man added, eyes void of empathy. I let them in, hands trembling as I opened the door. They walked through the house, jotting notes, asking questions that felt like knives. How often is she left home alone? Do you have any mental health history? Does she receive regular meals? I answered every question, my voice cracking with a mix of fear and rage. They asked to speak with Ellie in private. I looked at her and felt my heart drop when I saw her bite her lip, those bright blue eyes clouded with worry. I nodded, sat quietly in the kitchen listening to their muffled conversation. 15 minutes later they emerged. The woman gently placed a hand on my shoulder. We found no immediate concerns for Ellie's safety. This is just an initial check, but per policy we will open a file. I nodded, thanked them with a hollow smile, though I felt humiliated to the bone. As the door closed behind them, I scooped Ellie into my arms, hugging her like I could shield her from the entire world. That night, after Ellie fell asleep, I sat alone by the window. The house was dark. For the first time in this entire battle, I let the tears fall freely. Not because I feared losing the case, but because I knew Caroline was willing to do anything, even plant the idea in Ellie's innocent mind that her mother might be the bad guy. Emily arrived just hours later, after I called her in sobs. She wrapped me in her arms like she used to when I fell off my bike as a kid and skinned my knee. "You're stronger than you think," my sister whispered, "but being strong doesn't mean doing it alone." We stayed up all night planning. I started journaling every detail, every encounter, every word. I reached out to Ellie's teacher and requested academic and behavioral evaluations. I got documentation from her pediatrician confirming Ellie was developing normally in every way, physically and emotionally. I knew I couldn't just sit back and wait for Caroline to strike again. I had to be ready for the worst. No matter how exhausted I felt, I didn't let myself collapse. In the morning, I still smiled as I walked Ellie to school. At night, I still sang lullabies, even when my voice was hoarse from crying in silence. Ellie sensed something wasn't right, but she just held my hand a little tighter every time. One night before bed, she whispered, "I always choose you, Mommy." Those small words were enough to keep me fighting. No matter how many lies Caroline threw at us, no matter how many dirty tricks she played, one thing would never change. Ellie's heart belonged to me, and the love I gave her was something no one could ever take away. The day of the final hearing came, cold and gray like the fears in my chest. I held Ellie's tiny hand tightly as we walked into the courtroom, feeling her warmth like a fragile but unshakable source of strength. Caroline was already there, dressed in an expensive suit, her eyes sharp and calculating. Next to her sat Michael Rowan, the master of twisting fragments of truth into daggers. I sat down and placed my file on the table. Inside was everything I had. Ellie's report cards, doctor's notes, photos of her in extracurricular activities, letters from teachers. Every page, every image was a testament to the loving, stable life I had fought to build for my daughter. When the judge called for the hearing to begin, Michael stood, his voice calm but cold like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Your Honor," he began, "Mrs. Foster does not deny Ms. Mitchell's love for Ellie. But love alone is not enough. The child needs stability, a guaranteed future. Something Ms. Mitchell, with her inconsistent income and unresolved emotional grief, simply cannot provide." I bit my lip to stay composed. When it was my turn, I stood, took a deep breath, and began. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "I won't deny that I've grieved. But I've never let that grief interfere with my care for my daughter. Ellie has a safe home, a consistent routine, close friends, and a life full of love. I'm not wealthy, but I have enough love, enough patience, and enough strength to raise her every single day. I presented each piece of evidence, letters, photos, documents. I spoke of bedtime stories, weekend picnics, community events we attended together. Every word was meant for Ellie. I looked at her sitting quietly in the gallery, her small face unusually serious. When I finished, the room fell silent. The judge nodded, preparing to give his ruling, when a tiny hand suddenly raised in the air. I turned and saw Ellie standing, gripping a folded piece of paper, her little face full of determination. "Your Honor," she said, her voice soft but firm, "can I say something?" The entire courtroom held its breath. The judge looked at me. I nodded, tears brimming. "Go ahead, Ellie," he said gently. "What would you like to say?" Ellie unfolded her paper and read aloud, her voice echoing clearly against the wooden walls. "My name is Ellie Mitchell. I'm 5 years old. I like drawing, eating pancakes my mom makes, and hugging her before bed. My mom is with me every day. She smiles at me when I'm sad. She sings me the silliest songs. When I have a tummy ache, she stays with me all night. When I'm scared, she says wherever she is, it's always safe." Her voice trembled slightly, but she gripped the paper tighter and went on. "I know Grandma loves me too, but I don't want to leave my mom. I don't need a fancy house or fancy clothes. I just need my mom." Silence filled the room. Caroline sat frozen, lips pressed tight. Michael Rowan remained still, his gaze lowered slightly. Ellie folded the paper, gave a polite nod, and climbed into my lap like she was coming home. I held her tightly, my heart swelling with pride and love. The judge sat in quiet thought for a long time. He shuffled the documents before him, his eyes soft as they landed on us. "Ellie's statement will be taken into consideration," he said warmly. "While it is not typical for a child this young to speak in court, her words clearly reflect a deep, meaningful emotional bond with her mother. That carries significant weight in the court's decision." I held my breath. I knew the verdict was moments away. The judge leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, his expression contemplative. The air in the room felt heavy. I held Ellie tighter, heart racing. After reviewing all submitted materials, the judge said clearly, "The court finds no evidence that Ms. Mitchell is unfit to care for Ellie." My shoulders eased slightly, but I didn't breathe yet. "On the contrary," he continued, looking at us with gentle eyes, "the academic reports, medical evaluations, and most notably Ellie's voluntary testimony demonstrate a strong, healthy emotional attachment between mother and child." Across the aisle, Michael Rowan sat upright, still composed. Caroline clutched the arm of her chair, staring at the floor. "The court recognizes that while Mrs. Foster has greater financial resources, monetary advantages cannot replace the emotional stability and attachment a child needs." He paused, looked at Caroline, then delivered the verdict. "Therefore, the court grants full physical and legal custody of Ellie Mitchell to Miss Anna Mitchell." A wave of emotion surged through me. I nearly sobbed out loud. I pulled Ellie closer, her warmth anchoring me in that triumphant, unforgettable moment. The judge continued, firm and clear. "Mrs. Foster will be granted visitation rights. However, all visits will be supervised by a court-appointed social worker until further review." I heard Caroline's sharp intake of breath, but she didn't speak. Maybe she finally realized every lie, every scheme, every low blow had failed against a bond that could not be broken. The judge tapped his gavel. "Court is adjourned." I stood with Ellie in my arms, my legs light as air. As we passed Caroline, she turned her face away, eyes like ice. I didn't stop, didn't look back. I just held Ellie's hand and walked, straight to the door. Outside, the gray morning had given way to sunlight filtering through the clouds. Ellie tilted her face up, squinting at the light, then turned to me and whispered, "Mommy, did we win?" I knelt down, hugged her tightly, tears running down my cheeks even as I laughed. "Yes, sweetheart," I whispered. "We won." That afternoon, we returned to our familiar little home, where Ellie's bed waited with her stuffed animals, where the kitchen still smelled faintly of yesterday's pancakes, where every wall carried echoes of our laughter and tears. I took the letter Ellie had read in court and carefully framed it. I hung it right by the front door, where we'd see it every day as we walked in. That letter didn't just save us in court. It reminded me of something powerful. Love doesn't need to be perfect, it just needs to be real and persistent. And sometimes, the smallest hands are the bravest warriors. That night, as I read a book to Ellie, she wriggled into my lap and whispered, "Mommy, I don't need anything, I just need you." I closed the book, hugged her tighter, and whispered into her sun-kissed hair, "Me too, Ellie. I just need you." Outside the window, the wind rustled the white daisy garden, soft, like a lullaby for the peaceful days that had finally begun. Life slowly returned to its rhythm, but this time, everything felt sweeter, more complete. No more sleepless nights of dread. No more jumping at every unexpected call. In the morning, Ellie still skipped to the door, her fox backpack bouncing behind her, waving goodbye with a smile as bright as sunlight. In the afternoon, I picked her up, listened to her stories about games and colorful drawings, fueled by her wild imagination. One day, while we were baking together, Ellie looked up at me, those blue eyes filled with a strange kind of wisdom for someone so young. "Mommy, we're a team, right?" I smiled, wiped flour off her nose, and nodded. "A team that never breaks, Ellie." Every night, I spent a moment standing in front of that framed letter. Sometimes I turned on the light early just to let it shine on her shaky handwriting, our quiet reminder that we fought with everything we had, and we won with love. I also learned the biggest lesson of my life after everything we'd been through. Being gentle doesn't mean being weak. During all those days in court, facing harsh accusations and skeptical eyes, I believed that if I cried, if I showed my wounds, I would lose. I thought strength had to look like steel, firm, unshaken, untouchable. But it turns out, real strength lived in the tenderness I gave Ellie, in the way I held her when we were both scared, in those nights I was completely drained, yet still sang her to sleep, in the way I protected our little family with unwavering love, even when I wasn't sure I could keep standing. That gentleness, accepting that I wasn't perfect, that I could hurt and still keep going, that's what held me up. One day, while cleaning out our bookshelf, I found an old journal from the days right after Lucas passed. I opened it and saw a scribbled line, "Today, just breathing is a victory." I sat down on the floor, hugged the notebook to my chest, and smiled. We had come so far. I no longer fear judgmental stares. I don't feel the need to prove to anyone that I deserve to be a mother. Ellie loves me, and I love her, with a love strong enough to fill every crack in both our hearts. A few weeks after the trial, Caroline reached out through a mediator to request a supervised visit. I agreed. Not because I wanted to mend the relationship, but because I understood Ellie deserved to hold on to whatever warm memories she still had with her grandmother. The visit took place at the public library, where every corner was well lit and safe. I sat at a distance, watching Ellie excitedly show Caroline her newest drawings. I saw Caroline's expression soften for a brief moment, and then she looked over at me, no longer with hostility, but something quieter. I nodded slightly. I didn't need an apology. I just needed peace for my daughter. And maybe, just maybe, Caroline understood that too. That night, as I was reading Ellie her bedtime story, she suddenly asked, "Mommy, when I grow up, can I be strong like you?" I squeezed her hand, feeling the steady beat of her little heart under soft skin. "You're already stronger than me, Ellie." We lay there, listening to the night breeze rustling through the open window. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that we had truly found our way back to happiness. Not through grand battles or loud victories, but through the quiet courage to keep moving forward even when it felt impossible. Looking back, I realized that the custody battle wasn't just a legal fight. It was a journey to affirm the value of love and perseverance. I was no longer the mother who trembled under judgment. I had learned to trust myself, to believe in both my softness and my strength. And now, in the stillness of our peaceful mornings and the laughter that filled our little home, I knew we hadn't just protected our family, we had discovered the true power within ourselves. What do you think of Anna and Ellie's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about family, love, and the strength to overcome life's toughest challenges.